The wind carried a sound that wasn't quite a voice, half cry, half breath, stitched to the groaning of trees as snow fell thick and slow. It was the kind of night even wolves kept close to den, where stars hid their faces and the land forgot it ever knew warmth. On the ridge above the timberline, a figure moved tall, cloaked in fur and silence, boots leaving prints that filled almost as soon as they were made. Dakota didn't speak much anymore. His tongue knew 2 languages but had grown tired of them both. In war, words were useless. In peace, they lied. He'd made his home not far from the ridge, deep in the pines, where men forgot to look and even ghosts felt unwelcome. He wasn't looking to save anyone that night. He had followed no trail, heard no name. Just that cry, broken like a bone not yet healed. And something in him, something long buried with his wife and daughter 3 winters ago, turned toward it. He found her half buried under a drift, her skin mottled with the gray of death's approach. A young woman no older than the snowfall's memory, wrapped in a torn doeskin shawl, one moccasin missing. Her hair had been hacked short, uneven at the scalp. Bruises painted her wrists like storm clouds that never passed. Her lips were blue, but her eyes flickered open for just a second when he knelt beside her. Not wide with fear. Just resignation. She looked at him like one looks at the final snowfall, expected, but unwelcome. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer one. He touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, like he was testing flame. Then he wrapped her in the buffalo hide that had once been his daughter's. Lifted her carefully, she weighed less than memory, and began the long walk down the ridge. The cabin stood low and crooked near a frozen stream, its roof sagging under the weight of forgotten seasons. It wasn't his home, not really. Just a place he mended tools and sometimes dreams. Inside, it smelled of pine resin and ash and old leather. He laid her near the fire pit, built a blaze slow and deliberate, as if warming her spirit might coax it to stay. She didn't stir. Dakota brewed a tea from willow bark and dry mint leaves, then sat across from her and waited. The firelight carved her face into something not quite alive, not quite dead. Her jaw was clenched like she was bracing against the world even now. He noticed then, on the inside of her wrist, just below the bruise, a scar. A woman's scar. The kind that came from trying to make yourself disappear. He didn't sleep that night. He hummed an old song under his breath, the one his mother had sung when his little sister burned with fever. No words. Just rhythm and memory. The cabin creaked and the storm rattled like bones on the roof. At dawn, the snow still fell but softer, tired. He fed the fire again and reached for her hand. Her fingers twitched. He leaned closer. Her eyes cracked open, lids slow and swollen. For a moment, they didn't see him. Then they did. She flinched. "It's all right," he said. His voice was gravel and riverbed. "You're safe." She blinked once. Her lip trembled, and then she whispered, "Don't tell them I'm alive." He paused. The fire popped softly behind him. "I won't." She fell back into sleep. Not the desperate kind. A warmer sleep now. One that trusted she might wake. He sat back, arms resting on his knees. He looked at the floorboards, not her. He understood that kind of hiding. That kind of shame. It took 3 days before she could stand. In that time, he hunted silently and brought her warm broth in a cracked tin cup. She never asked where she was. She never asked who he was either. That suited him. On the 3rd day, she said her first full sentence. "They said I brought shame." He was mending the handle of his axe by the hearth. He didn't look up. "I love someone," she said, staring at the fire. "Someone my people hated. When he left me, they stripped my name. Said I should freeze for my sins." Still, he didn't raise his eyes. "I walked for 2 days. I thought maybe dying would be cleaner." Silence. Then Dakota spoke, slowly. "You didn't die." Her eyes flicked to his. "That counts for something," he said. For the first time, her face softened. Not into a smile. Not yet. But something in the lines of her mouth released. She sat beside him then, not close, but not far. That evening, he brought her a pair of wool stockings. She looked at them like a child seeing color for the first time. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The fire burned brighter that night. Not because he fed it more, but because for the first time in a long time, someone else breathed near it. At dawn, she woke to find the cabin empty. Panic flared, quick and sharp, until she opened the door and saw him sitting on a log, carving wood with a calm hand. Snow had stopped falling. The world was still white, but the sky above was cracked open with the palest shade of blue. She stepped outside slowly. Her breath showed in the cold, swirling like a spirit. She sat beside him. Quiet. What are you carving? She asked. He held up a little horse. The kind you'd give a child. Why? He looked toward the pines. It's habit. She nodded. After a pause, she whispered, My name is Wiaka. He let the name settle between them, then said, Dakota. Neither smiled. Neither bowed their heads. They just sat together in the hush of the new snow, two people neither dead nor whole, with a fire behind them and something unnamed beginning to form in the silence. And though they didn't know it yet, the worst was not over. But neither was the warmth. The cabin had no judgment in its walls. No cross hung from the beam. No memory in the floorboards asked where she had come from or what she'd done. The wind outside might have howled with opinion, but inside, the hearth hummed with quiet neutrality. Wiaka woke to the creak of Dakota setting a log into the fire. He didn't notice her watching. His movements were practiced, but slow, as if each action required permission from muscles long scarred. He wore his silence like others wore coats, buttoned high to the throat, shielding whatever had long gone unspoken. She tried to rise, but her legs trembled with the cold still clinging to her bones. He looked at her then, just a glance, and moved to place a bowl in her hands. Steam curled up from a simple broth of rabbit and bitter root. She accepted it without words. You don't sleep, she said softly, her voice still rough from frost. I do, he answered. Just not when others are weak. That silenced her. It wasn't meant to wound. It was the sort of thing men like him said because it was simply true. Later, when he stepped out to fetch more firewood, she traced the carvings in the window frame, tiny hash marks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some days he'd been counting. Or waiting. She wondered what he was waiting for. The days turned quiet. Still and slow, as if the storm outside had frozen time along with the fields. She began to move again, weak but determined. She swept the floor out of habit. Pressed herbs under the sill. She found a length of rawhide and wrapped it around her wrist, covering the worst of the bruises. She caught him watching, once. Not with pity. With memory. That afternoon, he left a set of worn moccasins by her cot. She stared at them a long time, then said, You were a father. He nodded once. She asked no more. The weight of what had been lost hung like smoke neither dared fan. The cabin began to breathe around her. In silence, in gesture, it made space. Dakota repaired the latch on the door. She boiled snow for washing. They rarely spoke, but language began to pass between them through rhythm, not voice. Two wolves in the same den. No need to growl. But the world beyond the woods didn't forget either of them. Old Maeve came first. An herbalist widow with a voice like weathered leather and eyes that had seen every kind of cruelty. She brought dried sage, saw Wiaka standing on her own 2 feet, and said with a raised brow, So the stories are true. Wiaka stiffened, but Dakota only nodded. Town says you've got a ghost living here, Maeve added, half smirking. I figured if that ghost was walking, she'd need roots for her lungs and something to keep the bile down. Thank you, Wiaka murmured. Maeve studied her. I've seen you before. Your mother was Ayoka, yes? Wiaka blinked. You knew her? Knew of her. She married into the wrong tribe, if you ask the tongues that tangle truth. And you look like her. Same eyes. Same stubborn mouth. Dakota stood between them like a quiet fence. Maeve handed over a pouch of herbs, nodded to them both, and warned, "Be careful with the cold, child." And colder hearts. After she left, Wiaka sat by the fire and whispered, "They know I'm alive." He didn't answer. He placed more wood on the fire and watched it catch. That night, she dreamed of drums. But they were faint, like they belonged to a time her body no longer remembered. The following morning, Dakota brought back a rabbit. She helped him skin it. Her fingers worked with precision, though her hands shook a little from hunger or habit. He watched her tie the hide as her mother once had looped, with reverence, and said, "You were taught well." "I was," she replied. Then, after a beat, they forgot that. A small smile, barely there, touched his lips. People forget what doesn't fit into their prayers. She looked up. "You don't pray?" He shook his head. "Not since my child died." The silence between them was full now, not empty. Full of ache. Full of understanding. By the third day of clear skies, the snow outside had begun to sink into itself. Wiaka found herself outside for longer stretches, gathering pine cones for kindling, listening to the quiet way the forest spoke when it wasn't trying to kill. She found the carving stump. Not far from it lay a pile of wooden shapes, some animal, some abstract, one shaped like a star with a jagged edge. She picked it up and held it in her palm, felt the grooves. "These for someone?" He approached quietly. No one laughed. She turned to him, the piece still in hand. "You keep carving, though." He nodded. "Sometimes making things is how I know I haven't stopped." They stood there, not moving. Then she placed the star gently back on the pile. "I used to bead," she said. Before they took my hands for other use." His brow furrowed. "I mean, not physically," she clarified, "but what's the point of beauty when you've been branded a mistake?" He didn't say anything. Just stepped back into the cabin and returned minutes later with a pouch. Inside were dyed sinew threads, bone beads, turquoise fragments. "Yours now," he said. "If you want to make again." Her breath caught. Her fingers curled tight around the pouch like it might vanish. Later that evening, she lit the lamp herself and began to sew, eyes focused, lips pressed tight, the way her mother once taught her on winter nights. He watched for a while, then turned to the fire and hummed again. That same old song. "Sing it," she whispered. "I don't remember the words." "Make them up." He hesitated, then tried. The words didn't matter. The act did. In that moment, the cabin didn't feel like hiding. It felt like something trying to live again. She worked until her fingers cramped. Then she lay down, not on the cot, but by the fire, on the rug between them. "Do they still talk about you in town?" she asked, eyes half closed. "They don't talk," he replied. "They spit." "Why?" "Because I didn't die the way they expected." She smiled softly. "Neither did I." And with that, the storm between them thinned another layer. Neither would call it trust. But it was something like warmth. Not the fire's warmth, something quieter, slower. Like the way snow melts at the edge of spring before anyone notices. Outside, a crow passed across the moon. A new wind stirred. The cold would come again, as it always did. But for now, inside the cabin, there was music, thread against hide, breath against silence. And neither of them was entirely alone anymore. The thaw had barely begun when the town began to speak. It started with whispers from old Maeve's kitchen, passed over bread dough and boiling roots. Then, like firewood snapping in a hearth, those whispers leapt to porch railings, church steps, and the benches outside Wilson's feed store. Words that had once frozen on the tongue now cracked sharp and fast. "She's alive." "He's keeping her." A Comanche man and a cast-out girl? Together? No one had seen Wiaka, not since the winter swallowed her up. They'd assumed she had died, as girls like her were meant to do when shame painted their skin and frost claimed the rest. But Maeve's visit, innocent or not, had loosened a thread. Now the townsfolk tugged it with growing appetite. Dakota sensed it before the air changed. the woods grew restless. Squirrels no longer lingered, deer kept deeper to the shadows, and even the crows, those heralds of change, circled in tighter, more curious spirals. Wiaka, for her part, knew better than to ask for peace. She had lived long enough among men who turned silence into weapons and kindness into suspicion. But something in her still ached to believe that the worst had already passed. Then came the day she found her name painted in crude, red letters on a pine board nailed to a tree just down the slope from the cabin. Tribe whore. She stood there a long time. Wind brushed the back of her neck. The snow under her feet had gone soft with the warmth of a premature spring, but she felt cold in her bones all the same. Dakota found her there, her shoulders still. He didn't ask what it meant. He read the words. Then he walked forward, gripped the sign with both hands, and tore it down in silence. He didn't burn it. He buried it. Later that evening, she asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" "What's there to say?" he answered. She looked away. "They think I don't deserve a name." He stared into the fire. "Then let them choke on their own." Wiaka had grown stronger. Her legs no longer trembled. Her voice no longer faltered. She had begun stitching again, small, circular patterns with bead and sinew that she tacked to the curtain cloth by the windows. Each piece was a quiet rebellion. A reminder that she still had hands, still had purpose. But the town's voices grew louder. Sheriff Darnell came up the trail one day, his boots heavy with intention. He carried no badge on his chest, it gleamed quietly from the holster near his hip. His jaw was clenched as if the very air between these trees offended him. Wiaka stood just outside the door, watching Dakota carve something into a fresh piece of wood. When she saw the sheriff, her spine straightened. Dakota did not turn to greet him. "You've got company," Darnell said, stopping just beyond the smoke from the fire pit. "Unusual kind." Dakota kept carving. "You know," Darnell continued, "some folks say you've kept a woman who doesn't belong to you. One that's got a record of shaming her bloodline and stirring conflict between tribes." Still, Dakota didn't look up. "She's no one's," he finally said. Wiaka's breath caught. The sheriff's face twisted. "You think that clears things up? People like to believe things are proper. That what's been cast out stays out. You make them doubt the rules, Dakota, they'll start making new ones." Dakota stood then, taller than any man should be, his shoulders wide as tree trunks. Darnell stepped back. "She stays," Dakota said. "And if the town says otherwise?" "Then the town's welcome to come up here and speak their piece." Darnell looked at Wiaka. "You speak for yourself, girl?" She met his eyes. Her voice didn't waver. "I do." He nodded once, slow and bitter, and turned without another word. That night, she asked Dakota, "Why didn't you ask me to go?" He was stirring the fire again. If someone doesn't want to stay, they leave. If they stay, it means something. And if they stay because they have nowhere else? Then they've still chosen this place over the cold. She looked at her hands. "I chose wrong before." "Then choose again." And so, she did. Wiaka began to walk farther into the forest each day. Not to flee, but to feel the wind on her cheeks, to remember what it meant to move freely. She began gathering bark, weaving tiny talismans she hung around the cabin like soft bells. She sang sometimes, under her breath, the kind of songs her mother had hummed when stitching medicine into fabric. One afternoon, she returned with wild mint in her palms and found Dakota asleep beneath the sun for the first time. His face, usually made of stone, had softened. The years that carved lines across his brow had relaxed. He was younger in sleep. More human. She watched a while, then sat beside him without waking him. Her hand inched toward his, stopping just shy of it. She didn't touch him. But she didn't need to. Later that week, Maeve returned, not with herbs, but with eggs. "You're part of the wind now," Maeve told Wiaka, matter of fact. "They can't unsee you. But maybe, if you make enough fire, they'll stop pretending you're cold." Wiaka took the eggs with thanks. She asked, "Do they still hate me?" Maeve smirked. They hate what you survived. They were counting on your silence. That night, Wiaka knelt by the fire, stringing beads onto a long thread. Dakota watched her, his carving knife idle in his lap. She looked up. You never ask what happened to me. Why I was cast out. I don't need to. But you wonder. I did, he admitted. But now I just watch who you are when you think no one's looking. The words lodged deep inside her. She tied off the last knot, held it up. A necklace, delicate, circular, balanced. Would you wear something like this? She asked softly. He hesitated, then reached out. I would, he said. She fastened it around his neck with trembling fingers. And as the firelight danced between them, neither noticed the storm building again on the horizon, quiet, patient, full of new winds. The town would not be quiet for long. The sky darkened too fast that evening, like a lid being lowered over a lantern. The air was thick with storm weight, the kind that didn't just bring snow but warnings. The clouds crawled, slow and wide, like wolves circling before a strike. Wiaka was kneeling on the cabin floor, smoothing a new beaded rug she'd been sewing for days. The pattern was simple but reverent, 2 figures by a fire, the thread looping in gentle arcs between them. She didn't say it aloud, but she'd sewn him beside her. Not as a protector. As a presence. Dakota was outside, splitting wood without rush, his axe singing in rhythm with his breath. But the air smelled wrong, like smoke before the flame, and his hand paused on the next log. He straightened, eyes fixed on the path winding down the slope, the same one no deer had touched in weeks. Hoofbeats. Not thunder, not wind, not random. Purposeful. Within minutes, 3 men crested the hill. One of them was Sheriff Darnell. The other 2 were unfamiliar, but their posture spoke of the same judgment, shoulders squared, hands twitching near the butt of rifles. They weren't here to talk. Dakota met them halfway, standing still as a tree that refused to fall. She's to come with us, Darnell said. No greeting, no courtesy. She stays, Dakota replied. Darnell smirked. You don't get to say. The council met. They voted. The girl is to be returned to her tribe for a proper reckoning. She has no tribe left, Dakota said. That ain't yours to decide. Dakota didn't speak again. His hands didn't reach for any weapon. He just stood there, as the snow began to fall, not soft this time, but sharp. The kind that stung when it hit skin. Inside the cabin, Wiaka could see their silhouettes through the frost-misted window. She didn't tremble. She stood, steady, then walked out and closed the door behind her. I'll speak for myself, she said, voice calm. The 3 men turned. I choose to stay. You're not welcome here, one of the strangers snapped. I wasn't welcomed where I came from either, she answered. But I survived that too. Your shame follows you, Darnell said. And yet, here I stand. Dakota took 1 step forward then, slow but unmistakable. You sent her to die, he said. She lived. That should end the conversation. The wind snapped a branch from a pine behind them. Darnell's eyes narrowed. This isn't your land. This isn't your woman. You're a ghost who forgot to disappear. Dakota stared at him for a long moment. Then let me haunt you quietly, he said. The men didn't draw their weapons, but the weight of them hung in the air. After a long silence, Darnell turned his horse without another word. The others followed, slower, their faces twisted with something between confusion and fear. When they disappeared into the woods, Dakota didn't move. Not right away. Wiaka stepped beside him. They'll come back, she said. I know. Inside, the fire had grown low. She fed it with dry birch, but it hissed as though reluctant to burn. She watched him as he sat, shoulders heavy. He looked older tonight. Not from years. From carrying too much unspoken. I don't want to hide anymore, she whispered. You don't have to. But if they burn this place? Then we build another. She turned toward him, something fragile forming in her chest. Why? He lifted his head, and in his eyes was a kind of softness that hadn't existed even a week ago. Because I remember what it was like when no one stood between me and the storm. The wind howled outside then, pushing at the walls like a living thing. The fire danced erratic, shadows staggering along the beams. Wiaka sat close, her knee brushing his. It was the first time she didn't flinch. He looked down at the necklace she had made him, the one he now wore always, and reached up to touch the beads. "You still believe in beauty," he said. "I'm trying." The storm screamed louder. That night, they did not sleep. She sat across from him, the fire between them, their eyes holding one another through the flickering light. No declarations passed. No vows. But in the silence, something louder than any word began to root. Before dawn, Maeve arrived. She slammed the cabin door open, snow dust billowing around her like she'd wrestled with angels to get here. "They're coming back," she said. "And they ain't bringing words this time." Wiaka stood. "When?" Maeve's jaw clenched. "Before the next sun sets." Dakota reached for his bow. "Then we'll be gone." "No," Wiaka said, voice clear. "We stay." Maeve turned, surprised. "They'll light this place to ash." "Let them," Wiaka said. "Fire can't erase what's been lived." Maeve stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, slow. "You've got more spine than the rest of this town combined." That evening, Wiaka opened the cabin windows. She hung her beadwork where the wind could see. She lit sage and let the smoke curl out into the trees, into the gossip, into the judgment. Let it say what it wanted. They ate in silence, their hands occasionally brushing. She laughed once when he dropped a spoon, and the sound startled them both with how rare it had become. And as night fell deep and black, snow thick again outside, the fire refused to burn steady. It cracked and spat, uncertain. But they stayed near it. And neither blinked. The storm broke just before dawn. Not with thunder, but a silence so vast it made the walls groan. Snow had piled waist-deep against the cabin door, sealing them in like bones beneath a burial mound. The wind had died suddenly, almost respectfully, as though the storm had taken its last breath and vanished before its shame could be named. Wiaka was the first to rise. She moved with purpose, her feet bare against the wood floor, her eyes clear. She stirred the coals and laid on birch slivers, coaxing the fire back to life. This time it caught immediately, strong and unwavering. Dakota sat nearby, sharpening his blade, not for blood, but for readiness. He wasn't a man to provoke, but he was a man who finished what others dared to begin. His calm wasn't the absence of fear. It was the presence of history. "They'll come today," Wiaka said. He didn't ask how she knew. He simply nodded once and tied his cloak. Outside, the sky hung pale and empty. The trees glittered in new frost, but the birds had not yet returned. The quiet felt earned, but not safe. By midday, the snow began to crunch. Not wind, not deer. Footsteps. Dozens. They came slowly, figures moving through the woods like guilt-given form. Sheriff Darnell led them, his hat low, his rifle slung but ready. Behind him walked townsmen with axes, torches, pistols. Not a mob. Worse. A decision. Wiaka stood just outside the cabin, the beaded shawl around her shoulders glowing in the weak sun. Dakota stood beside her, unmoving, his height casting a shadow that reached toward the line of men. Darnell didn't shout. He stopped 15 paces away. "You had time to leave," he said. Wiaka answered, her voice low but sharp, "We didn't run from the first storm." "Why would we run from the second?" "We came for her," Darnell said. "You can walk away from this, Dakota." "She's not leaving," Dakota replied. "She has no claim here." "She has mine." Those words landed heavy. Not loud. Just final. Darnell's lip curled. "That's not a law." "It's enough." A torch was lit. The fire moved hand to hand. The wind caught its scent and carried it like a warning through the trees. Dakota didn't reach for his bow. He took one step forward and looked not at Darnell, but at the men behind him. "You've known me 20 winters," he said. "You've seen me hunt, heal, bury my own. I took nothing from you. I bled on this land same as your fathers." One of the younger men lowered his torch. Dakota continued, "And she didn't ask for your kindness. Only that you let her keep her breath." The fire flickered in uncertain hands. "I won't fight you," Dakota said. "But I won't step aside either." A long pause. Then a voice from the back spoke, one of the older men, someone who'd fought beside Dakota during a drought year. "She pulled my grandson from the fire last spring," he said. Heads turned. Little boy had his foot in the coals, screamed like I've never heard. Wiaka grabbed him before I could move. The man looked at her now. "I didn't forget." Another voice added, "She fixed my wife's hand after the birthing." A third said, "She saved my calf with some damn root tea she boiled herself." The torch wielder dropped his hand. Then stomped the flame into the snow. Darnell turned, eyes wide. "You all gone soft?" "She earned more here than you ever did," someone muttered. Dakota took another step forward. "Go home." Darnell clenched his jaw, but even he knew what defeat looked like when it came wrapped in grace. He spit once in the snow, then turned. The men followed, slow at first, then steady. No one looked back. The woods breathed again. Wiaka let her shoulders drop. Dakota looked at her. "You all right?" She nodded. "You?" "I am now." Inside the cabin, the fire danced. Not frantic. Not scared. Steady. They sat side by side that evening, neither speaking. Her fingers found his without thought. His didn't pull away. The snow outside softened. Melted at the edges. Dripped from the eaves in rhythm with her heartbeat. The next morning, Maeve arrived with seeds. "For planting," she said. "Might as well make use of the cleared earth." Wiaka took them gently. "We'll grow roots." "Good," Maeve replied. "Let the town eat their words when they smell your garden." Weeks passed. Then months. The cabin no longer hid them. It became something else, an anchor. Wiaka planted herbs near the steps. Children from town came, slowly at first, then often. Dakota taught them to carve. She taught them to listen. One day, a settler woman brought cloth and left it without a word. Another left chickens. Nobody apologized. But the silence between gifts said enough. The fire was never left to die again. Inside, beside the hearth, the rug she'd sewn still lay. 2 figures, by the flame. Thread between them, not knotted. Woven. And in the quiet, Wiaka once whispered, "I think I'm still healing." Dakota looked at her hand in his. "So am I," he said. When the snow stopped, they were still there. And they were not afraid anymore.